My name is Gina Duvernay, and I'm the Adult Services Manager for Gwinnett County Public Library. Thank you all for being here. We are happy to partner with Karis Books Indicator. Let's give them a round of applause. You guys are so good. We're thrilled to have two amazing guests with us this evening. Dr. Carl Sudler. Carl, can you wave at the people? Thank you. Dr. Sudler is an associate professor of history at Emory University. His publications, teaching, and public scholarship have placed him among a small number of African American scholars who study the intersections of Black life, crime, and sports since the late 19th century. Sudler's first book, Presumed Criminal: Black Youth and the Justice System in Post-War New York, is widely used in college and graduate classrooms across the country. And Carl will be in conversation with Raymond Santana. Let's give him a round of applause. Raymond is an activist and author. He travels around the country telling his story of hope and overcoming obstacles as he continues to fight against the inequities of the American justice system. Santana is also a designer who owns the clothing company Park Madison NYC, named after his hometown of New York. You know what to do. Thank you.
How we doing? So, how we doing, Ray?
We're good. We're good.
The first question I always ask authors, students, I got some students in the audience, I come into the classroom and I tell my students, I don't care if it's 120 people in the class, I'll be like, how we feeling? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways. It's my measure. And then I look around and get a sense. But I got to ask you, it's my mandatory question. How are you doing right now?
Busy, but I'm good. So I got a thumbs up. Well, sometimes it's like this, but it's all right. All right, it's just busy.
Yeah.
Busy's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I think I've been following your career and stuff for a long time now, and so watching since the book publication or the lead up to the book and then post book, it requires a different kind of energy.
Yes.
So where, before I even get to asking you questions about the book and the company and what's going on, where you finding that energy from right now?
As being one of the exonerated five, and I understood that I had a platform, and that platform was to talk to our younger generation, also to give them the story, because it's a story of inspiration, of never giving up and overcoming obstacles. So the inspiration it always draws from that. Because once I understood I had a platform, then it was my duty to tell the story. And once it was my duty, once you gotta step up to the plate.
Yeah.
So that's where the inspiration comes from.
So I am so excited you decided to put a book out into the world.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that as an academic, as a scholar, I'm around a lot of book writers a lot of the time. And sometimes I think we downplay the accomplishment of finishing a book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And these books are important because they outlive us.
100%.
And so I got a million questions about the book that are going to give the audience a sense of what's in the book without telling them what's in the book, because we want them to buy the book, support the book,
read the book,
talk about the book, give it away to people.
That's
keep
right.
The book going, keep the story out there. But we've been watching some of the images come up. You decided to take an interesting approach to the storytelling. You did a memoir and a graphic novel working with the artist Keith Henry Brown. What made you go this route instead of a traditional young adult book or a traditional kind of biography? What made you go this particular route?
Because I dealt with different mediums. We got the doc by Ken Burns. There's a book by his daughter Sarah, which is called The Chronicle of a City Wild in the Central Park Five. We have the Netflix series When They See Us by Ava DuVernay. And so for me, it's always been about using different mediums, right? Because the message is always the same. Even though we changed the medium, the message is always about reaching our younger generation. So when I approached the book, it was approached to be a graphic novel, more like comic book style, right? And then the senior editor, Carolyn, she suggested that we go in a different approach. And so even Keith Henry Brown, he was skeptic at first because he had did all these drawings. It took him about 9 months to complete them, and then a third of his drawings weren't used, right? And so he was kind of like, kind of he was undecided with the direction of the book. And so when we explained it to him, it's like, no, this direction that we go in, it's an easier read.
Yeah.
We have to target our children. And so, then it's like, I didn't want to make the book complicated, right? And even in the imagery, right, in the illustrations, like the colors that pop, the words of the transition, like we wanted to make it that easy, that, from the youngest to the oldest gets it.
Yeah. I think a lot about comics. I mean, shout out to one of my graduate students here who has a chapter in his dissertation about comics right
Nice.
now. But through this, right? Like, so the medium is certainly tailored to a younger audience, but the content, the subject, it's emotionally real, right?
Yes.
It's drawing, it's truthful. And so how did you think about balancing that? Like, how could you keep the realness and the authenticity in this story while thinking about the younger audience?
So the book is written during the pandemic. So what I used to do is, because I couldn't actually sit there and really type or write it, it was too long. So I did these voice recordings. And so in the voice recordings is where when you listen to it, you get to hear all this passion, right? You really get to feel a sense of what I'm going through, because that is coming straight from the source.
Yeah.
And so these voice recordings, I did them every day for a while. And so for me, that's also where the energy is, where we tap in at. Yeah.
One of the things I think, the book in many ways tells your story, and you're the source of your own story, and it's always important for us to, hold on to those things. But in doing so, in telling your story, you are also making an effort throughout the book to correct people's kind of perceptions or misconceptions or misunderstandings of the criminal justice system, the criminal legal system. And one of the big things is, thinking about prison, right?
Yeah.
Thinking about, the idea of prison or being incarcerated as a badge of honor, as a rite of passage for so many of our young people to demonstrate a particular kind of manhood and manliness. And you're using this medium to be like, nah, that's not what it is at all.
100%. It's we don't want it to be a badge of honor. For us, we were 14 and 15-year-old kids who never had no dealings with the law, who didn't even know who Miranda was, right? These were seasoned veteran detectives, 20 plus years on the police force. They were the elite of the police department. And so we want to tell that in the story because it needs to be heard, right? Kids go through these things all the time. And so that was our way of connecting, right? To show them that, you want to give them the realism. It isn't a badge at all at the end of the day, especially when you see the science behind it. Like in my travels and in my studies, even young, because I'm in prison and I go to college while I'm in prison. And so that's where I start to, some of my foundation is grown, in prison, going through the college. And then, I had to relay that in the book because we didn't ask for this, right? This was something that was given to us. And then we kind of took lemons and we made lemonade.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, to that point, you were
14 years old.
young.
Yeah, I was 14 years old.
Yeah.
I was 14.
And I think about that, right? Because the subsequent conviction is intense, right? The process is intense. You mentioned the various mediums that we've been able to have access to your story over time, but there was something poignant about having your voice with these pictures telling that story. But I think one of the things that continues to resonate is you were 14.
14 years old, didn't understand the system, never had no dealings with the law. And even my dad, right? My dad had a 10th grade education. He worked at the same job for 44 plus years. He retired there. So he never had no dealings with the law either. And so when you get to like the interrogation scene, my dad is just as clueless as me going into that because he doesn't, it's the unknown, right? Not understanding what you're stepping into or what you're going into, right? It has to be pointed in the book. Like in those interrogation rooms, we're in there for 15 to 30 hours,
Yeah.
right? With constant pressure being put on you with no sleep, no food, and no water, right? And these are 14 to 15-year-old kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think a lot about that, right? As a new dad, as you know, like I think, you know, as a parent, your concept of age dramatically changes. Because sometimes, you know, I think about my old 14-year-old self, and I'd be like, yeah, I was grown.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we were different as
Uh,
14, right? Like back
uh,
then, like, you know, I rode the train as a 13-year-old. I maneuver around the city. I would never, ever let my daughter walk around at 14, right? But back then, that was part of our survival, right? We had to move like that. It was a different time.
Yeah. No, I actually appreciate some of that stuff in the early book, right? About when you talked about moving from one neighborhood in New York
Yeah,
to
from the Bronx
another.
to Harlem.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I actually appreciate some of that backstory, because there is something particular about being, you know, a early teen, but it's also being an early teen in New York City,
yeah, yeah.
you
We're
know,
different.
in
We're
that,
definitely different. We
uh,
grow up fast. You grow up fast.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But now, you know, again, to the point about thinking about like being a parent now, like, yeah, like your idea of what a 14-year-old is, you're just like, well, yeah, these are babies,
Yeah,
you
no, they
know, these are,
babies.
yeah, yeah.
They're
And I know
babies.
like the meaning sense, but I just mean in the sense of like our ability to want to protect them.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, what your book regularly kind of tells us is the legal system in this particular sense had no interest in protecting y'all from it,
Not at
right?
all.
And what was about to happen.
Yeah, it was the total opposite. This was, you know, the city was looking at bankruptcy. They were looking at where the next check was coming from. And, you know, Black and Latino kids in New York City became cattle, right? And so we were pushed through the system. Once it happens to us as 14 to 15-year-olds, 40 states changed their juvenile laws, right? You wind up getting the like the 3 strikes rule in New York where you can get life as a persistent, right? All these changes came about this case, right? In 1994, the crime bill comes in, which now uses the terminology of wolf pack,
Yeah.
wilding, urban terrorists, which was the labels that were given to us as 14 and 15-year-old kids. And so they use this terminology to make people be upset, right?
Mhm.
It's an emotional appeal. And once you become upset and you start to look at us different, right? Even the sketch artist. The
Right.
sketch artist, you know, apologized years later because she said that in the courtroom she would draw us and we would look dark. We look like creatures, right?
Mm.
And that's done deliberately because when people come home from work and they sit there at 6 o'clock with their dinner and they cut on the news and they start to talk about this case back then, for those of you who remember, when they showed pictures of us, we looked like we were dark and like we were animals. And then they make people say, well, whatever they accused of, they probably did do it.
Oh.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this was a city that became heartless towards us. Right. Ken Burns said that we were the 5 most hated human beings on the planet Earth in 1989.
Oh.
You know, and so it has to be highlighted in the book.
Yeah.
You can't let them get away with it. Because at the end of the day, they target us as people, as a community. Right. And so they preyed on us.
Man, so I didn't even have this question in my notes, but just based on what you just said, well, I think a lot of, I'm gonna go back to the medium. So thinking about the choice to then use
Yeah.
illustrations to retell this story, is that a conversation you had with the illustrator about like how the images looked, or was that?
No, I let him just do what he had to do because I had faith in him. I saw his drawings. I liked his work. So it was like, let him do what he has to do, and then we'll see it after.
Okay.
You know, and then when I looked at it, you know, I was happy with the results because even later on he says, you know, I drew it like if it was you doing it,
Mhm.
and I was like, because there's parts in there like, you know, where like
Yeah.
when you get to the book and you'll see like the 5 faces. It was stuff like that that he put in the book that you know, I wanted him to do it without actually saying it, and he did it.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, there's a particular kind of trust you got to have in the artist
You have to.
to capture the story.
You have to.
But you know, shout out Keith because he did a really good job of putting this together. All right, so I don't, you know, again, just the story, as tragic as it is at the beginning, right? We do end, we sitting here
Yeah.
partly because of all the work that has happened since, right?
Yeah.
And a little bit of that comes out, you know, toward the end of this book, right? We see kind of you know, the trajectory, right? From and that's a, you know, I want to say I actually appreciate some of that early preteen life too, because we see kind of those moments of joy, those moments of, you know, youthfulness, those moments of, you know, that were then kind of taken, right? And you know, one thing about time, you don't get it back.
No, never. Keeps going.
And so, you know, so those moments were taken. And so since um being released, since being exonerated, that part of the story is actually important as well. You know, if not more important, as we kind of think about the lessons that can be pulled in. So just thinking about that part. So like, how have you really been thinking about what you need to do with the platform in the retelling um, of this that, you know, has charged your mission now as an activist, as a potential elected official in the near future?
brought
You
that
know,
part up.
I had to bring it up.
Yeah,
I
it's
had, you know, New
It's
York is
fine.
tricky. New York tricky.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
but I think that's all part of it, right? I think,
Yeah,
you know,
it
that's
is.
certainly part of it. So
It is.
so how do you build, you know, that part into what you then want to see going forward?
For me, from going from a 14-year-old kid, not understanding the law or nothing, and then being thrown into this, and then trying to figure it out, right? And then overcoming the several obstacles along the journey. Um, I get to a sense where I go, okay, once we exonerated, the city's still fighting against us, right? There's an 11-year history of a civil suit.
Mm.
There's articles still written up to 2012 saying that we're still guilty of something, right? And so it's an uphill battle. Bloomberg is in office. He's going on 3 terms, right? This was a no-pay case. What we found out with Bloomberg was that he also worked at Solomon Brothers, where he got fired from, which is where the jogger worked at. So this became personal. So here it is that we fighting all these obstacles, right? We get exonerated. We go this 11-year battle with the city. We finally win. Donald Trump says that it's the biggest heist in New York City history, right? So this is a man who's still doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on us. And so for me, it was like I didn't know none of these mediums were coming, right? I was just figuring out we got a civil suit, we got to fight against the city. It's going to be a long battle, and just get ready. And so for me, it was about, you know, in the beginning, it took them 2.5 years to charge us, try us, convict us, and send us to prison. Now you got to deal with us for the rest of your life because we're exonerated. And so that's where the mediums start to come in, right? It's like, you know, we meet Sarah Burns. She's an intern at our attorney's office who later on writes the book called The Central Park Five, right? And in her writing the book, her father's editing the chapters, which later on we find out is Ken Burns, which now the documentary, the Central Park Five comes along, right? But we're still in this battle with the city, you know? And so now what we do is we got to be strategic. We got to get in front of every mayoral candidate and ask them, do they support us? Because everything is weighed against us. So we continue to keep using the mediums, right? Now, finally, when we settle with the city and then we get to When They See Us with Ava DuVernay, we're grown now. We're different. So now the story goes more in depth. We're willing to tell the full story in its entirety because now it comes from us. And so it comes from us. For me, it came from the fuel of wanting these people, and that's the prosecutors and the police officers. Like my focus was that every morning you wake up, I want you to see us on your TV. I want you to see us in the book. I want you to see people talking about us, right? And so that was the motivation to do all the mediums. You know, because it was about never letting them forget what they did to us. Right?
I mean, you know, Gina brought it up in the introduction, and I almost did the very cheesy cliche thing where I was going to wear my own Park Madison, New York t-shirt. And then I fought the urge. But again, I mean, to your point about thinking about medium, I will say one time that I did wear the shirt, I was giving a book talk at the Decatur Book Festival in 2019, and it was in front of a packed audience, and the shirt I was on stage with was the one that bore all of y'all names that you know, was making with the brand. I'm a big person. My students will tell you, I show up to class with these sneakers, t-shirts, and they lucky if I got an overshirt on. Otherwise, just my tattoos be out here. But but I do think about sending message in different ways, right? So if I'm giving a big talk or something like that, I'm like, all right, what am I gonna wear that also kind of resonates? And I don't talk about y'all case in my book. I talk about a lot of, historical cases that are eerily reminiscent. Um, but I share that to say I did a major book talk with y'all shirt on. Part of that was thinking about kind of this long history. And so even your work in fashion, do you see that as something that's connecting to your mission of fighting injustice in that capacity?
Yes.
Or are you just trying to be at the Met Gala or something?
No. I tried that at one point. Like, maybe we could do the Met Gala, but they wasn't trying to let me do none of that. Because it was like once I start to build the brand, and for me, because also with the book, the book deals with it too, is my lost passion for art, right? Because I was a sketch artist growing up when this happened to me. And so throughout my years, the book talks about me trying to regain that passion, and I keep losing it. And so when I get to developing the brand, that's part of the passion. That's me reliving the life as that little 14-year-old boy, right? And so when I say it's a t-shirt, the t-shirt is the canvas,
Yeah.
right? It's also, for me, the art is my way of escaping reality. And so trying to escape, but I can't because I'm an activist, right? And so now I got to use the t-shirt as my canvas. Because if I try to do some artwork that tries to get me to the Met, everybody goes, nah, that's not working. But if I put out a conscious t-shirt with a message, that resonated.
Yeah.
So then it was like, all right, the people spoke for me. And so now the brand has to stay on that same mission.
Yeah.
It can't cross over.
I'm gonna do the very academic thing here for a second. I'm gonna be like, I'm taking us to page number 208. And a part of it is, again, like I had the privilege of getting an early copy. I got to sit with it and read with it, and I kept coming back to this page. So this is kind of spoiler alert. This is a quote from page 208 when you get there. But something that you wrote was, prison is about adapting to this life, especially adapting to getting an education. School is hard and life is hard. And then you mentioned that your mom also passed when you was in prison.
That's correct.
But she would also tell you how important education is. The position of education throughout this book, whether it's formal education in the traditional school sense, the thinking of education, like political education on the back end of, exoneration, the education that you got from inside of prison. How do you think your message is also tied in this moment in which everyone is telling these young people that education doesn't matter? You are telling these people that at your lowest of low, one of the things that kept you going was the pursuit of knowledge, was the development of your own intellect. That resonated for me throughout the book, even if it wasn't deliberate.
Yeah, no, it's in there. It's part of it. It's
so
part of it.
Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Yeah, because for me, when I go to prison, right, and I get convicted and I get sent to the juvenile facility, right, for me, like, hope is kind of lost for a while. And so I'm kind of just moving along through limbo. And it isn't until I grab education. So I wound up getting my GED while I was in prison. I wound up getting an associate's degree. And so I had this class that was a Black Studies class. And I had a professor in there by the name of Latif Islam. And so when he gave us the syllabus, it was like 5 or 6 books on the syllabus, but we were only using one. And so I was a smart aleck in the class. I had a smart mouth. So I call out and I go, why you give us all these books if we only using one book? Right? And he says, you don't understand it right now, young man, but later on you will. This will become a part of your arsenal. And so I just brushed it off. But and then as I got through the course and I got my A in the course, because it kind of unlocked some things in me, I went back and I started reading those books, right? And the first one was Autobiography by Malcolm X, right? A People's History by Howard Zinn, Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Wilson, Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, Volumes 1, 2, and 3, Black Economics. And I'm not lying because my daughter's here. She got the books right now. She got the book. She got the books right now. But it was through that education which started to give me the foundation of who I was going to become later on.
Yeah.
I still had ways to go because I was still young. I still was naive, and I still had to experience some things. But when it clicked and it all makes sense, it was like a wow moment.
Yeah.
Even leading up to when I decided to run, one of my advisors becomes a prestigious man by the name of Larry Seabrook, right up in New York City. This man has been a councilman. He has been an assemblyman. He has done it all. He even went to prison before, right? But it was in prison that he brought the college program to prisons. He started teaching at Marist College, where he met Latif Islam because he taught him in prison, right? Wow. And Latif Islam becomes my professor later on, and me and Larry connect when we get into politics.
Oh, wow. Wow.
It's like a wow, yeah. It's like a full circle moment.
No, I mean, I'm as a college professor, I'm always in the classroom fighting these fights, whether it's students trying to use too much AI or, or fighting these new, the 2025 fights.
Yeah. Yeah.
But one of the things I constantly tell them in the classroom is and it's not like an anti-AI stance. But again, I just remind them, if education wasn't important, that many people wouldn't be fighting to keep you from it.
100%. 100%. 100%.
And so it's just,
Yeah.
So I think, like, again, I think your book hit me at a time where, like, again, I'm fighting the fight with some of these undergrads and some of my grad students, and none of y'all though, none of y'all. But
y'all the good ones, right? They the good ones.
But I'm just constantly thinking about this, and I'm reminded, and I'm like refreshed to see that, again, folks, who have the privilege to be at a university like Emory, who are just giving it up for nothing, right?
Yeah.
Giving it up for, and not taking advantage of what's at their disposal. I'm always reminded that, folks turn to education when they realize just how much value is in it. And sometimes folks need to hit the bottom, to see
100%.
it. And so that really resonated with me throughout the book. I'm looking at the time, Gina. I want to make sure I leave some time for Q&A for the audience. So I'm gonna just, I got you. I'm gonna just ask you one more question, Ray. And thinking about, as somebody who writes about police in particular, I write about the juvenile justice system. Conversations that we're regularly having are about policy reform and about systemic reform to the system. What do you believe is the most crucial systemic reform that needs to happen now to prevent any future Central Park to exonerated 5 kinds of situations?
I think for me, I'm doing my part, right? My part is to tell the story. My part is to let them know that it does exist. It happens all the time. This is a system that wants you to, that rather have you locked up in a jail cell than a college dorm. This is a system that runs on billion-dollar budgets. Everything attached to the criminal justice system is calculated in the billions of dollars. I always use New York because that's my home base. And when you look at that, right, when you look at everything that's attached to the criminal justice system, that's in the billions of dollars in budgets, and it's on the back of 75,000 inmates, right? Another thing was that back then, inmate, it cost them about $40,000 a year to house them. A juvenile was upwards of 200,000. So do the math where the money was at. So, it was a strategic plan for them to lock us up at a younger age, because then they get more usefulness out of us, right? And so at the end of the day, the story is always to tell what happened to me, because it's the best example that I can use.
Yeah.
Right? That I live to tell the story, and that we survived through it, and that now we in a position where we could constantly give back.
Yeah. No, so we appreciate that. Yeah. You want me to call for questions, or? All right. So I do want to leave us ample time. We got about 20 minutes. I have more questions if we run out of time for questions, but I want to give you all a chance to ask Raymond Santana some questions as well. So we could do I could probably, yeah, I have classrooms about this size. I'll start, yeah.
How did you know you wanted to tell your story? Like, what inspired you to tell your story?
I had no choice. Like literally, like, like this was like even after exoneration, like I stated, they still wrote articles about us years later, talking about we were still guilty of something. They didn't want to let the narrative go. And so we knew that in order for us to be effective, we got to tell our story. We got to let them see that it's a different narrative. That the one that they pumping is the one that they've been pumping for years, but it's a false narrative, right? They got a whole country to believe that we were guilty of something we didn't do. And even when the DNA evidence comes back, we're looking at they're going to come back and say you lied, and they never came back. And so we were 14 and 15-year-old kids, and we just felt like society let us down, right? But we had to understand that even they were given a false narrative, and they were pumped with that false narrative. Within the first 2 weeks of this case, there were 300 to 400 articles written about us, dissecting the lives of 14 and 15-year-old kids, calling us Wolfpack, urban terrorists, wilding, right? And so for us, that was a battle that at first we thought we couldn't win, because that train was running so fast that it was hard to hit the brakes. And so once we go through exoneration, we get a chance to slow it up. And once we slowed it up, we were able to say, all right, now we can stand and we can talk. And so, and my lawyer, Roger Wareham, at the time, he said, nobody can tell your story better than you, right? And so that was it. Once he told me that, and I knew I had a mouthpiece, you couldn't shut me up. But it took us a long time. It was a battle. The city wasn't trying to give us anything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, right there. Yeah, you.
Oh, thank you. Dr. This question is for, I guess, both of you, but it's like, I want both of you to answer. The interrogation of Michael Crow. Are you all familiar with that?
Refresh my memory.
Yeah.
White boy, 15 years old, interrogated by the police without his parents. They went ahead and threw everything out and made the law that youth can no longer be questioned without their parents. Now, his case came after yours. How do you think your case played into setting the stage for that? And why can't more people of color be afforded that opportunity?
Well, we did push legislation, because now when juveniles go into those interrogation rooms, it's recorded in its entirety, because we want people to see the full scope of what happens. When our case happened, all people got was the finished product, right? So all you got is me sitting there saying, approximately 1,700 hours, myself and 49 friends traveled southbound into Central Park. And you go, what 14-year-old boy talks like that, right? But that's the version that they gave out. So, we knew how important it was to fight for that legislation, and we did. So we had a hand in that in New York State.
Okay.
Yeah, we had a hand in that. And then we also pushed more legislation to get outside agencies involved when the juvenile is arrested, because, he don't know his rights, and sometimes the parents don't either. Yeah.
I'll do the historian long picture thing, because one of the things I write about in the book that kind of drew me. So I write about New York City. The book starts in the 1930s, and what I found alarming early on was when the New York Police Department made the decision to start tracking and building case files for what they were referring to as potential delinquents. And that is, and that is what they labeled as potential delinquents were thinking about any individuals who lived in the kinds of social conditions that may lead to proximity of crime. And then, so I spent like years looking at case file after case file, and like over 90% of the juvenile files were labeled as potential delinquents by the New York Police Department. And I just thought I was just like, this can't be right? Like this, like, you mean to tell me you think a kid is going to be bad is enough reason to have documentation by the actual police department on said kid? And so, and there were all kinds of fights from the community about like trying to think about like, how can we kind of make the charge that this this kind of predictive policing is problematic. And so much of it had to do with, in those early years, again, we're talking 1930s, 1940s, just kind of keeping a particular element of New York away from other parts, right? And that long history is something that we see well into
Yeah.
the 1980s, right? And it's just, you know, it's had like long-term ramifications. So I say that to say they don't keep potential delinquent files, or at least labeled in that kind of way, but we're still very much having conversations about what kind of conditions may lead to crime. And I think, you know, folks are often careful to be like, you know, we know that quote unquote poverty can lead to criminal behaviors, but that doesn't mean that everybody who lives in poverty is a potential criminal, right? And so there's just, you know, a careful line that you have to kind of tread. And there's a very long history that has been institutionalized by police departments, especially in New York, that have weighed into that kind of thing. Those, oh, yeah.
Thanks for sharing your story. My question is, what did you guys do when you finally saw freedom? Like when your first day out,
That was a long time ago too. It was, but I think my first day out, I think I had some Chinese food. And I couldn't answer the phone because the reporters were calling my house for like the next 2 weeks trying to do interviews. Because I was the last one that was released on the jogger case. So, you know, and then after that, you know, it was exoneration. And after that, it just became like fight against the system. So, you know, it was always full steam ahead, you know, to the point, like for me, because I moved forward so much, I would do these mediums and put these things out. And then my thing is like, enjoy it, stop. Like you got a book out. And in my mind, I'm already thinking about what I'm gonna do next, right? Because the message is that important to me, right? At the end of the day, it's by any means necessary to try to save that young man's life, right? So the most stuff I could do, I'll continue to do it. Yeah.
So we'll go here and then to the back, yeah.
I was just gonna ask, can you address the incident, you know, before you were accused? How did that come about?
Oh, all right. So in 1989, right, it was a holiday weekend. I usually had a 9 o'clock curfew, but my dad let me stay out a little long because I was going to this party in another neighborhood because there was this nice little young honey I would like to go see. And so, you know, I've never been in Central Park, right? I've been on the outskirts, but I've never been in it because originally I lived in the Bronx and then I moved back to Harlem. So I never been to the park. And so on this night, me and a couple of my friends go to Cedric Houses, which is right across the street from Central Park, right? Because there's a party there. Like I said, I wanted to see somebody. So I didn't know Yusuf, Antron, Kevin, or Corey, right? I didn't know them, right? I didn't know any of them. But that day, that night when we in front of the Schomburg Houses, we had mutual friends. So that's how the group became so big. And it was, for the Schomburg boys, that interest on Central Park, they was always there. So I was a follower that day, right? I was 14 years old, so I just followed the crowd into something that was unknown, right? And so throughout the night, the crowd dispersed because of the police, right? A man does get assaulted by the reservoir. Later on, they find out it's a kid by the name of Jermaine Robinson. He takes the charge. And so we get arrested that night, and we were originally charged with trespassing, menacing, riot, which is misdemeanor charges. We were given disappearance tickets to go to family court the next morning. But we had to wait for our parents to come pick us up. And so it took a long time for our parents to get to the Central Park precinct. And so in the wee hours of the morning, they found this woman that was in the ravine, and she was bound by her hands, right, and her face. And she had all these injuries around the eyes. And so originally she lost so much blood that they thought it was gonna be a homicide case. So they called in the Homicide North Detective Squad, and they asked, did you see some boys running around the park that night? And they said yes, and we was the ones that got arrested. So they held us so that we can be interrogated by the Homicide North Detective Squad, right? And so as they're questioning us, all they know is this woman has been raped and they don't think she's gonna make it, So in their mind, they think they got the right culprits. There's also a woman by the name of Linda Fairstein, who is the head of the sex crimes unit. She goes out there, she's gathering the information, and she's calling the police and give it to them as they're talking to us. So they didn't even have the facts, what they perceived to be the fact. They didn't even have it right. And so we go through this interrogation process for 15 to 30 hours where we wind up confessing to something we didn't do, right? And so, and you know, that's another question. They go, well, how do you confess to something you didn't do? Well, if you put under extreme amounts of pressure and you feel hopelessness and you're just trying to find a way to stop the pressure from forming, sometimes a 14-year-old kid will lie, right? And yeah, even though I didn't see a rape, I didn't know these other guys, the police gave me their names. And so they got me to a state of being so helplessness and so defensive that I felt that there was no way out. And it's in the book, right? And those are stuff that we see now, CSI and Law and Order, the good cop, bad cop, right? It really works. There's also the READ technique, which is 7 steps on how you can get somebody to confess to something they didn't do if you apply the right amount of pressure. And so we are living examples of that. Yeah, it's true. It happens all the time.
We'll go to the back and then we'll come back over. Yep.
Thank you for being here
Thank you.
and continuing to persist in spite of all this. I wanted to address the predictive policing part because actually that's happening and has been happening in Georgia. There's gang identification trainings for K-12 educators. I don't know how many have actually done it, but I was wondering if you have experience or information on how to fight back against that, because it's getting worse and worse, and most people just don't hear about it unless they're working in the policy field.
No, I believe that when you come across a situation, you got to voice it. You got to express it. If people don't hear it, then they don't know it. And for me, it's always about unifying the community, right? That's the biggest thing. Like that puts anybody, that puts your legislative people, your elected people, it puts them under pressure to listen to constituents. It always starts with unifying the base, right? That's where the power is at, is the power of the people. You know, I always say that if you come with 5 people, they laugh at you. If you come with 50, they give you a nod. You come with 5,000, they want to sit down and talk to you. So it's always about organizing. That's what made me get into politics. When I started to see the conditions of my neighborhood in East Harlem and how it looks, right, with the drug paraphernalia and the homelessness and just the dirtiness of the streets, right? And so what I try to do is unify the people to make one voice. So that's where it always starts. It always starts with activism. It always starts with grassroots movements, letting people know that it exists.
So just so you know, it exists.
But it's true. It's true because even us, when we started to tell our story, people in the beginning, when you start, like, because, you know, everybody knows about the jogger case, but they didn't know the ins and outs. And then when you start to tell them and they go, wait a minute, that sounds scripted, right? It's the same reason why when they see us as playing, people can't get past the first episode.
How did that come to be, sir?
So I went to see this movie called Selma, right? And I was sitting there watching Selma, and the place was really quiet. And there's this scene where Coretta is confronting Dr. King about his infidelities, right? And I was sitting there and I was highly upset. And I'm sitting there like, who made this movie and put our hero on, you know, he's on a pedestal. Who started to show his flaws? And so later on that night, I went home and I researched who made the movie, and it was a woman by the name of Ava DuVernay, right? And then I looked up and I said, oh, and she got dressed too, and she gonna disrespect our heroes? So I was upset, but I started to think about it. And we were in a position where a lot of people wanted to help us tell the story, but they would say, the finished product will be, well, what did you think happened? Do you think the exonerated 5 are guilty? Do you think they're innocent? And that's not what we want. We want you to tell the narrative. And so I said, wow, if she had the guts to tell that about Dr. King, she'll tell our story, right? No, I'm gonna get to that next. That's what so then I'm on Twitter, because at the time, me and Yusuf got a good presence on social media. So I'm on Twitter, so I find Ava DuVernay. So I tweet her, right? I started following her. She followed me back. And I remember I got all hyped. I was like, oh, she's following me. Like the plan is working, right? I didn't have a plan. And so she followed me back. And then one day I just shot a tweet at her. And I said, what is your next film gonna be? And I gave her these hashtags, and it was CP5, Central Park 5, fingers crossed. And she retweeted it. So now when she retweeted, you couldn't tell me nothing. I was in my house like, oh, she retweeted it, it's on. And so maybe like 30 days later, she DM'd me, right? She DM'd me and she was like, so like nobody's telling your story? And I'm like, nah, we waiting for you. And then that was it. She came to see me. She came to New York. We sat down for about 2 hours. And that was my moment to that was the pitch. This is it. I have nothing to lose. I got to lay it all on the line, tell her everything, and make it so that when she walks away, she goes, can I meet the other brothers? And I was like, yes. And that was it. And we got it. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, we got enough for one, maybe two more questions. Yeah. Go.
Thank you for continuing to tell your story. 35 years later, are you, it's not a long time if you say it fast, right? I mean, it's like, but what do you see as the trends with our criminal justice system in New York City? Is it trending better, trending worse, the same?
No, I think it's worse. It's a deterioration there that you see, even though the criminal justice system doesn't house as many as it used to. But like when they start to put out quality of life crimes, which means that they're reaching, they're trying to, this is a system that needs you to occupy that space, right? Because if not, it doesn't get the budget. And so in 1995, we see Governor George Pataki, he turns the system from rehabilitation to punishment. So they pull out all the programs and they boost up the sentencing. And so you see a climb there, but now it's kind of steady. And so the system still operates on punishment. It doesn't operate on rehabilitation. And as long as it doesn't do that, then we in trouble. Yeah, so that's, for me, my plan is hopefully to get in there and try to make some change in there where we can get back to rehabilitation. Because a lot of these guys who go into prison, they're gonna come back into our neighborhoods. And how do you want them to come back? To be a better criminal, or to really come and want to be productive? Because recidivism says that you'll go back to prison within 6 months to a year, right? Because these new obstacles that you'll face, you don't know how to handle them. And so when we go back to rehabilitation, then that becomes more programs, more transitions for these guys that are coming home, because they got to go somewhere.
Yeah. All right, there's no pressure, but anybody want the last question? All right, go ahead, jump in.
Thank you for sharing your story first and foremost. But what advice would you give to young people, teenagers, right, who may be thrust in this situation and they weren't prepared for, like yourself? Not only the teenagers, but also the family. Like you say, your father had no experience with law enforcement at all. So knowing that any day that can become your reality, what advice would you give for a young kid and also a family going through this?
Never give up. Like for me, it doesn't matter. It can look so dark and bleak. It looks like you have no way out. And sometimes all it takes is that right swing, right? And for me, that's what it's about. No matter what's thrown at you, no matter how many obstacles you think that you can't overcome, if you keep pushing forward, you will be able to. And that's because that's the best thing I can say, right? Never give up. I can tell you all these other quotes and spiritual things, but it's the bread and butter. It's the bedrock. And it's something that we have within us to always keep pushing forward, to be resilient, to never give up. And that's what stories of inspiration are made of, right? The guy's getting beat in the boxing ring and he just takes that one swing and he hits you and knocks you out, fight over. That's the story of the underdog. And that's who we are. We're the story of the underdog who overcome multiple obstacles.
Yeah.